Next up is a man with over a decade of blended experience in digital strategy, with experience in topics including SEO, analytics, and eCRM. He's worked with agencies, startups, FTSE 100 companies, and everything in between. Welcome, Jono Alderson.
So where shall we start? I'm going to talk very, very quickly, so apologies in advance. You may wish to have a look at the deck later in slow time, because I've got a lot to get through in 30-something minutes. So I've spent the last 18 months or so looking at where digital is going and analysing the moves of the big companies like Amazon and Apple and Google, and starting to look at their long-term strategies. So if we're saying that successful strategies for us and our clients look like understanding the market and the competition and spotting opportunities, part of that is understanding what the landscape itself is going to look like. So I've spent a long time and a lot of energy trying to extrapolate out what are people doing, what are the big guys doing, and where's that take us? And I've come to some pretty scary conclusions about new technologies and the impact that will have on us as marketeers, as digital practitioners, as clients and brands, and as consumers and as a society. So I'm going to blitz through some of what I think is going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years, and you can make some of your own decisions and decide what you want to do about it. So I think 4 or 5 years from now, our lives will be managed and run by machines. That software and systems and processes which are developed and managed by people like Amazon and Apple and Google will compete for our attention, for our needs, and to fulfill our wants and desires. That the marketplace of the future is the human experience, that our hunger, that our desire for company, that our need for shelter, that these very, very fundamental human requirements are the marketplace that these brands compete for. And when you start to dig into what these guys are doing, what Google are up to, what Microsoft are up to, you start to see there are 5 key areas that they're all competing over. These ideas of the production of things, manufacturing, etc. Fulfillment, so I want to get a thing, I want to buy a thing, how do I receive it? The delivery of stuff, so how does stuff get moved from A to B? Communication, including all the data transfer and infrastructure around that. And the idea of aspiration, which is somewhere which Apple is very big on, for example, this idea that I can buy products and have experiences that make me a better me, that make me happier. When you start to look at these as a group, what you see they're really trying to compete over is the human experience. That these brands, like the Facebooks of the world, are aiming to own our needs in these categories because they want to own us as consumers. It makes much more sense for them to try and compete to own our behavior than it does for them to sell things to us one at a time or advertise to us case by case. If they can be the brands that we associate with human needs and our desires for things rather than just wanting to buy stuff, then they can make much more money from us, they can own us over our lifespans, they can do a much better job of making money. There is an interesting question, sorry, this is a much shortened version of the deck, so I'll skip over a whole of this, but there's an interesting question as to the implications of this and whether these are truly human needs or whether these are the needs of these organizations to make money. So, for example, we don't really need, technically, the ability to get stuff in a parcel in under an hour in urban areas, which is Amazon's big play at the moment, but them telling us that we do and them encouraging it makes it a big prevalent part of our lives. The risk throughout all of this, which I'll come on to, is that we end up creating a world designed for these organizations rather than for the consumers we're meant to serve. So the future unfolds in a series of waves, the first of which is the new high street. Interestingly, the future of digital begins offline, I think. If you take a brand like Waterstones in the UK, who are the premier book retailer, you'll see that they are struggling, that they're part of HMV Group, HMV famously being the brand that failed to adopt the digital revolution. Its high street stores that sold music and DVDs died because it didn't change. When you look at Waterstone's About Us page on their website, it says, we understand that digital is changing the way that people consume. We understand that people come into our stores, look at the books that we sell, make a note in their phone, go home and buy it off Amazon. They understand that they're already in a losing game. It would make a lot of sense for them to start to look for opportunities to reinvent themselves and to survive. And it's not a huge leap of the imagination to think that they might try and become something a bit more like an Apple store. That if they were to, say, use Goodreads API, which is Amazon's data source on what people read and the kind of books they like and how they review them, they could very easily start to recognize individual consumers. So when I go into a store, they can say, hi, Mr. Alderson, how are you? We noticed that you finished this book. We noticed you didn't like that one. We noticed that you haven't read anything in the sci-fi genre for a little while. They can start to manage my experience. As a result of doing that, I build a brand association, which is much more positive and involved than my transient book purchasing at the moment. And in the future, when I think I need something to read, or what do I read next, Waterstones is the brand I associate with. And in fact, they can be really clever because they'll start to learn about my behaviors and they can anticipate that requirement and they can market to me before I even know I have a need. This is really important because it means that their competitors who would previously have fought over me in the marketplace no longer have access to me as a consumer. Waterstones, they can start to manage my experience. As a result of doing that, I build a brand association, which is much more positive and involved than my transient book purchasing at the moment. And in the future, when I think I need something to read, or what do I read next, Waterstones is the brand I associate with. And in fact, they can be really clever because they'll start to learn about my behaviors and they can anticipate that requirement and they can market to me before I even know I have a need. This is really important because it means that their competitors who would previously have fought over me in the marketplace no longer have access to me as a consumer. Waterstone's smart marketing and use of data enables them to take me out of the marketplace and own me as a consumer rather than trying to sell me a book at a time, etc. Of course, they're not alone. There are a whole bunch of brands that are positioned to do things like this, and I'll caveat these as some very specific examples of who the kind of front runners in this revolution might be, but it only takes one brand for that kind of cascade to happen. If they do something like that, it's not a big move for somebody like Game, who retail software and hardware and consoles and music, etc., to say, okay, we have access to the PlayStation Network API, we have access to the Steam API, which both have wealths of data on how people consume media. And then they can do exactly the same thing. They can say, hi, Mr. Alderson, we think you might like this. When they've got that kind of data and usage, it's not a huge step for them to say, based on that data, we think you might also like these new headphones or this new movie. And they can start to extrapolate out and be much more intelligent than other brands. And that starts a chain reaction on the high street for people to start to own me as a consumer. You can see that happening in the UK at the moment. So Sainsbury's, which is a kind of old-fashioned, fairly generic supermarket, bought Argos, which is the place you go to get packaged goods, toasters, washing machines. And that's not a coincidence. That's them trying to own more of the consumer experience. It's Sainsbury's trying to reinvent themselves as the brand that you go to get things, not just to buy bread and milk or bottles of wine, etc., but to be the brand where you go to fulfill your requirement for stuff. And the more of that market they can own, the more the consumer experience they own, and they gradually take that consumer out of the market. This has huge implications on brands like Currys and PC World, who rely very heavily on seasonal footfall, for example. So it comes to Christmas or it comes to New Year, they launch huge offer and discount programs where they try and get people to come in, try and get them to buy cheap discount goods. If there are equivalent brands in the space who have already understood me as a consumer and already know that I'm likely to need a new refrigerator, or have already marketed to me with a discount laptop that knows exactly the kind of specifications and RAM and hardware that I'll need, again, I am no longer in the marketing funnel. So our entire digital marketing world, which at the moment looks like, how do I get as many people as possible to my website and convert, starts to crumble because the number of people in that marketplace itself reduces. The whole top of the funnel starts to disappear because huge swathes of customers who would have been researching have already been captured. And of course, the implications of that are the cost per acquisition rockets. So things like cost per click rates in pay-per-click search, affiliate rates, all of those numbers go up and get more expensive per action per consumer because there are fewer consumers in the space. And then, of course, in the real world, there's diminishing footfall and so on and so forth. And a lot of these commodity brands who exist to try and capture customers with bulk awareness and price-led offers really start to struggle. So, in summary for wave one, then, there's a revolution happening now. Some of these brands are committed to making these kinds of changes already. Waterstones, in particular, for example, has committed to making this very kind of change. They are stating openly that they are reinventing themselves as a personal assistant. So, as a brand, or if your clients are just chasing conversion on how many visits did we get or how did we rank, rather than saying, how do we earn more consumers? How do we build relationships so that we are the brand that people associate concepts like entertainment or fulfillment with? You're going to start losing market share, both on and offline. And you're not even going to see it because at the moment you can say, okay, our traffic's going down, our conversion rate's going down. When those people aren't even in the market, all you see is diminishing footfall, and it's going to hurt. So as an action, you need to start looking at lifetime value modeling. You need to understand what is the size of the market, what's the behavior, how much money can I feasibly make from people, not just in one sale, but over the course of their lifespan, and how do I upsell them, how do I keep them happy, what are the costs of that, what does a good customer look like versus a bad customer. All of this is stuff you've got to be thinking about now, because as soon as your competitors start thinking, and you're, so that starts to trigger some stuff happening online, and the first of which is the birth of the new marketplace, which starts with Uber. It's a mistake to consider Uber to be a taxi company. Uber is a data company. Uber is an API. Uber is uniquely positioned to understand how to effectively get a thing from a place to another place. And that sounds like a fairly straightforward thing, but when you consider the complexity of understanding supply and demand, the amount of vehicles you need on the road, where all of them are at any given time, actually what they've achieved is an incredible feat. Now you couple that with the idea that they can very, very easily say, let's extend this into sending parcels and taking on things like the Royal Mail infrastructure and parcel providers. You can move to white vans and lorries and start doing bulk delivery and freight. This is all stuff that's happening now. You'll see some examples on my screen of places where they've opened up APIs. They are delivering people shopping. Uber are very aggressively moving into being the brand that fulfills city level and last mile delivery. Their whole company is designed to be fluid. Allow this. The only thing that's held them back at the moment is their penetration of the suburbs, which is a product of how many cars can they have on the road, which is a product of their market share. So all of their aggressive investment in growth and getting people on board the platform is to grow out their footfall. They've got more vehicles on the road, which are driven more effectively, more efficiently, which becomes cheaper, which means then they can start becoming shipping and distribution. In the US, they are very aggressively trying to push it so that anybody can become an Uber driver, so that when I'm on my way to work, I can get a notification from the Uber app saying, hey, if you just take a 2-minute detour, pick up this parcel and drop it off on a route you're already going down, we'll give you $3 or $4. And suddenly Uber ceases to be the taxi company everyone perceives it to be and starts being the delivery API. Why is that important? Because it allows Amazon to make their power play. Amazon's long game is to have market dominance on anything in a box. All of their investment in automated warehouses, in the storage of perishable goods, in things like Amazon Dash and Amazon Pantry, is all gearing towards them replacing the supermarket, being the brand that dominates on getting things to you. The ability to get anything into your hand within an hour for free as part of Amazon Prime is an ambitious goal, and that's their long game. You can see evidence of this at the moment where across the US, they're opening thousands of retail stores, and they're initially positioned as bookstores, which are very intelligent. So they stored books based on their average ratings from the store, rather than just what they thought you might like, which meant that they were a much more dynamic and better personalized experience. They tailored that by location. So as a shopping experience, it's much more effective than your average bookstore. They start to, again, win consumers in hearts and minds. Obviously, as they expand their footprint, these don't remain bookstores. They evolve into click and collect bookstores. So evolve into click and collect stores. This is a hugely powerful proposition. Simultaneously then, millions of entrepreneurs start coming online. So Google's Bloom project, Tesla's theoretical broadband satellite network, Facebook Aquila, all happening today. These will bring millions and millions of entrepreneurs online from developing markets and the third world, people who have aspiration to disrupt, to develop, to create businesses who haven't had access to our markets before. And the really important thing to consider there is two things. One is the next generation of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency will allow them to transact very cheaply internationally, which is prohibitive at the moment. And they will not transact and develop in big clunky e-commerce sites. They'll disrupt our chat apps, Facebook with their own applications and smaller marketplaces. You see this in China with things like WeChat at the moment, whereas rather than entrepreneurs and startups building big websites and trying to get VC investment and doing the whole Western approach, they just infiltrate existing systems where consumers are. Why is that important? Because it means that marketplaces, in the truest sense of the word, the idea where people come together freely and try and vend each other things, become the new digital marketplaces. That platforms like Facebook and Etsy and eBay and Kickstarter are really where this begins. So as Western markets, we have more disposable income because things are cheaper, because places like Amazon have lowered the cost of delivery, of transport, storage, and millions of entrepreneurs in the developing world can access and disrupt our markets. Now, this is really key. And when you look at really successful companies like Uber and Airbnb, the kinds of people who understand that liquidity is an asset and that they're not tied down to a fixed model, they're really just ideas. Uber doesn't own anything. It doesn't have any particular property or infrastructure. It's an idea and it's a concept. And you could develop a similar concept and disrupt our market remotely. So people in the developing world will be building apps and solutions and businesses designed to be marketed over here with minimal transaction costs and international trading costs. Overnight, our entire world will change to lots of small disruptive apps and marketplaces. That's exciting. The principle being then, in which case, our world, which is based on how do I get lots and lots of people to my big e-commerce website or my big brand website, actually the paradigm shifts to how do I be in the place where consumers are and how do I be in the apps that they're in? Because if your big brand is sat waiting for consumers to come to you, they're never going to get to you because they're already going to have their needs met in these distributed ecosystems. Also, incidentally, some interesting stuff kicks off as 3D printing really takes off. So this is happening now. It never really becomes a staple of the home because the diversity and types of materials that you need are complex, are in some cases expensive, in some cases perishable. It doesn't make sense to have a big multi-purpose 3D printer in every home. Where they do take off is in community hubs. And you'll see an example on my screen for Makers Cafe, which is a real place in London where you go in, you order your coffee, you pick what you want to 3D print, and it's done on the fly. Also, Amazon investing heavily in this. They have a van which you order your 3D printed goods, and whilst the van is in transit on its way to you, they print it in the van. Amazon, interestingly, already own the 3D printing marketplace. They have a big section of the website which they've built because they know that 3D printing is going to take off, and they're going to start promoting it much more aggressively, where you can order your own 3D printed goods, or you can buy the templates to do it yourself. This is the next generation of products. And when you consider, again, the developing markets and the nature of marketplaces, suddenly printed goods and 3D templates flood those places. So rather than buying soft furnishings or jewelry or clothing or furniture, you buy a 3D printed template and print it yourself, or you order it via a template, and the cost of commodity goods decreases considerably. I'll point out that drones never take off as transport solutions for that reason. When you've got an Uberized delivery network and commodity goods are cheap, it doesn't make sense to try and fly things, because whilst people like Amazon will never partner directly with Uber to ship you things, the courier services that Amazon use, people like DHL, like I'm trying to think of an equivalent, I can't, all the services that Amazon leans on will use Uber's API systems to understand how best to efficiently deliver things. So the cost of transport and distribution gets incredibly cheap. It doesn't make sense to try and fly things. Where drones are particularly interesting is as sensors in the sky for things like traffic density, weather patterns, and movement, which I'll come on to later. Also, slight aside, there's a guy called Pierre Farr who used to work for Google, very, very smart guy, who talks about the concept of the nascent distributed content ecosystem, which takes this concept further, which is that it doesn't make sense to try and drag people into your big website when there are an increasing number of distributed apps that get more and more fragmented, things like Slack, things like WhatsApp, things like WeChat. This is the beginning of a revolution where your content and your brand and your products don't live on your website. They live in 100 little places where your consumers are. The challenge is that some of these platforms won't be around forever. Some of them might only exist for 6 months. Some of them might fail. But as a business, these are where your consumers are. So you need to make business cases as to whether you develop into them, how you try and retail and transact and behave in them. As organizations, this is a struggle because typically we've built a big website and a big database and pointed it all inwards. Now we need to be pointing it outwards. We need to say, how do we develop hub and spoke models so that we have our warehousing and our product information and our content live somewhere centrally, that you have a distributed external outside bit, which you can very easily say, okay, let's very quickly develop AMP pages, for example, or Facebook instant articles or Telegram integrations. You've got to be able to move very, very quickly. Because otherwise this happens, you become one of these brands that just exists to sell commodity mass market stuff cheaply. In the advent of distribution cost diminishing and 3D printing, these brands really, really struggle because they're comparatively expensive, they're comparatively slow, and they're definitely not as personalized as the opportunities you can reach through things like Etsy and Folksy and eBay. So wave 2 then is all about the idea that there are no more traditional USPs, that most businesses today are built on the idea that they're big or fast or cheaper or better in some way. All of those things are very, very easy to disrupt. Your competitive advantage, and the only thing that really makes you survive, is where you are, your ability to move quickly and easily, and how technically competent you are at doing that. For us as individuals, that means becoming very, very technically capable, that we've got to be savvy in things like Angular and Node, and MySQL and PHP, and I mean, that's even last generation tech. You've got to be on top of the whole digital marketing revolution. Otherwise, you're going to wake up one day and maybe find that you're no longer a digital marketer, but just a marketer. Scary stuff. I'm going to go a bit faster because I'm running a little bit short on time. There's a lot to get through. So wave 3 is all about personal assistance, which is a huge revolution. I'm going to skip through some of this and some of this. What's interesting in this big, exciting revolution of new tech is that a lot of it won't happen very quickly. Things like mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality are expensive to produce comparatively. So whilst things like Magic Leap will change the way we interact with technology, things like Google's headsets and the Samsung Gear will produce phenomenal brand experiences and allow you to do exciting salesy stuff. The cost of producing media for that is going to be much higher because you're going to need designers and developers and scripters and people who can work in that medium, who at the moment are going to be more expensive than people who can write and draw. So that doesn't change the world overnight, unfortunately. What does, and this is a key point, is the idea of how connected devices work. And this is really important for us digital marketers. So there's a myth that one day your fridge will be able to know when you've run out of milk and buy you more milk. The mechanical bit of that is easy. There's some kind of plate sensor that says, okay, buy more milk. The bit that nobody considers and questions is where does it buy it from? Now, if your fridge is manufactured by, say, Bosch or Beko, one of the big manufacturers, I'm not comfortable with people who build fridges also building and managing payment gateways in my fridge. There's security implications, there are privacy implications. I don't trust them to manage my card transactions. And also, a little bit awkward. How does the subscription cost for work? Who's footing the bill of that transaction happening? If my fridge is manufactured differently from somebody who manufactured my freezer, am I paying different subscription fees to different payment gateways? Does it go through PayPal? Nobody's really answered any of this. The other interesting question is if my fridge wants to tell me what I should eat for dinner and what I should cook. It can't do that unless it's been designed to talk to my freezer, which is manufactured by somebody else. They've got to have a shared language, a shared schema. It's all got to be open source, and none of this works. There's too much interoperability required, too many requirements for these pieces of tech to be too many different things and to anticipate each other's needs. There's a big gap in this world of connected devices, which is why we don't see a lot of intelligent homes yet, because all of these things try and do it their own way. It goes a long way to explain why people like Google, Samsung, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple are all developing home kits. This idea that there is a thing that sits in your home that you talk to that acts as a hub that is where all this information pulls to, because actually your fridge shouldn't try and order you milk at all. Your fridge should ping an API call to your Google Home device or your Amazon Echo that just says, I'm out of milk. And then your hub device is responsible for making decisions on where it sources that solution. Now, this is really, really important because for us as digital marketers, skip some of this. For us, I will skip, loads to get through. The important thing for this is a few things. One is that this makes me less and less involved in my decisions and my research and my purchase decisions. If my fridge is telling my Google Home that I need more milk and my Google Home is going, okay, let's get it from Amazon, I'm not involved in that process. Whereas historically, I might have Googled, I might have gone to the shop, I would have had some transparency and some choice. That led to some interesting challenges with privacy, which nobody's really solved yet. Now, the answer to all of this and where this becomes really interesting is the Home Hub is where you make or break your brand. The Google Home, the Amazon Echo will make decisions based on an understanding of personal preference. So when I say, hey, Amazon Echo, I want a pizza, rather than it saying, where do you want to get a pizza from? It'll make a decision. It'll make that decision based on which apps do I have installed on my phone, where have I had pizza before, which pizza places have I been to physically recently, what are my reviews like on TripAdvisor. This is all data that my Home Hub has access to, that my Google Now device, my Google Home device, my Google Now account can all access and assess. It can use all of that information to say, actually, the best option is to use the Just Eat app, for example, because I've used that app a lot. I've had positive experiences with it. I rated it well in the App Store. The Home Hub will be responsible for picking which brands fulfill that request. Now, if I'm Domino's Pizza and I want to be the brand that the home device picks to give me pizza, I better already have a relationship with that consumer. I've got to have impressed them. I've got to have a positive history. I've got to have been in their life and their experience already in order to be picked as that solution. This is hugely important because the experiences of your products and services then has to be app-like. I'm not saying go away and build apps, but I'm saying that the way in which people engage with you and consume your content and buy your products and interact with them has to leave a footprint that these devices can then analyze and understand and say, yes, okay, when Jono wants to buy new clothes, this is the brand that we should go to and pick because he has a positive relationship with it. It's hugely impactful. So first mover advantage is a huge deal. The brands who get there first will win market share. If you don't get there first, there's only really two ways to get in and compete. One is people have to have a negative experience with the brand. So the only time I will ever open my phone or my Google Now interface and say, you know what, don't get me pizza from Domino's again, get me pizza from Papa John's, is if I have a really bad experience. And it'll only take one and I'll go in and do it. But otherwise, even if the experience is just okay, I probably won't bother. So one way is to capitalize on people's failures. The other way is through partnerships. So if I'm Just Eat and I want to be the person delivering pizza, I might say, for example, hey, Netflix, you guys have an understanding of people's activities, things they like. Netflix could do something like, say, you're sat at home, it's dark, you're cold, you've had a bad day, you haven't watched a film in a while, here's some stuff that your friends like. All of this is data that they can harvest via the home hub, via your phone, etc., and then partner with Just Eat to say, hey, here's 20% off a pizza, and do you want to switch your provider for pizza? This is the future of not only app marketing, but the whole way that you ingratiate yourself as a brand into people's experiences. And then going back to the beginning, if you want to be the brand that owns the experience and the relationship rather than just selling things one at a time, you've got to get into those ecosystems, and this is how. I'm going to skip over a whole bunch of stuff because I'm running short on time and there's some key bits to get through yet. Anyone's scared yet? Interestingly, where this continues to evolve is, I'll give you an example. There's an app called Flipper, which is pictured there, which automatically changes your gas and electricity supplies. And it integrates into my Google Nest device. So I will never again go and take an energy reading. My Google Nest will automatically monitor my energy consumption, will notify Flipper and keep it up to date. Flipper will go out and scan the market, find me the cheapest deal and switch for me automatically. Now, if I'm a gas and electricity provider as a brand, it's very, very hard to penetrate that ecosystem. Price won't cut it unless I have a disproportionately positive relationship with you as a brand. I'm not going to be interested. I'm never going to see your marketing. I'm never going to notice your advertising. I'm never going to engage with you. You've already got to be in my life. You've already got to impress me. Of course, this creates a huge scramble for loyalty and for being able to do things like coupon codes, etc., but you're fighting a losing battle. Essentially, then you can't afford to create friction. And friction might be not being there. It might be being in the wrong place. It might be providing a bad experience. But you've got to be present and you've got to be sleek. You've got to make sure that your whole organization, never mind your products, is about experience and positive experience. And you've got to grow outward into the consumer ecosystem rather than inwards into your own website and app, etc. So in 2 minutes or less, what's this mean for us as marketeers? Let's see. Essentially, I think there are only 4 types of brands that excel in the future. There are brands who are lucky enough to manage their entire chain. So people like Primark and the big fashion brands who create the demand, who manage and supply the resources, and who retail them and have a closed feedback loop. Very, very hard to disrupt these kinds of systems if you're lucky enough to be in them. The underdog with a story, people like Pebble, who were the first big competitor to the iWatch and the smartwatch space, who've evolved, they've won hearts and minds. If I buy a Pebble watch because I believe in their story and their product and their vision, chances are every watch I buy forever will be a Pebble watch. That's a huge commitment. The really big brands who understand that they need to disrupt themselves in order to survive. So people like Trinity Mirror, who own most of the newspapers in the United Kingdom, all of the regional city level papers, have created departments within their organization whose remit is to rip apart their brand and try something else, try and find ways that they can leverage their brand penetration and their understanding of their audience to make money. And it might be that 10 years from now, Trinity Mirror doesn't sell newspapers, that they've transformed entirely because they can use their scale and their budget to innovate with money. And of course, the real big winners are the people who really understand the implications of machine learning, complex attribution, and behavioral analysis, which I'll go into briefly. Because the key thing here is that Moore's law continues to hold true. The computational rule of thumb that processing power increases exponentially year on year because of the amount of firepower that you can fit on a circuit board on a transistor. And why is that important? Because it means that people like Google and Amazon can continue to provide increasingly cheap access to large-scale cloud computing. Why is that important? because it means that things like call centers suddenly cease to be a thing. Because, and this is happening right now in places like BT, in places like TalkTalk, where when you phone up call centers for basic support, you are answered by a machine, which has been taught to sound like a human by listening to humans speak. It tries to answer your question, usually gets it right, and when it fails, falls back to a human operator. The human operator answers the query whilst the computer still listens. The computer learns and it knows for next time. So these people are becoming inputs for machine learning and training sets and data points and gradually making themselves redundant. It's scary. Why is this relevant for us? Places like PPC will very quickly feel this, because the idea of a human being manually writing ad copy, of changing individual bids on individual ads and ad keywords doesn't make sense when you consider that a machine can do it 1,000 times better and 1,000 times more accurately. The only thing that means this, the only reason this isn't happening yet at scale is because the firepower is only just really becoming available at relatively accessible costs. And interestingly, it's not about how sophisticated your software is in the large. The real winners will win on the sheer volume of data that they can manage and curate and feed into the machines intelligently. Why is that important? Because we really only think about the implications of machine learning in the context of marketing. When you zoom out a little and you think, if I can deploy computers that are this intelligent in systems, why wouldn't I also put them in charge of branding or business strategy or people's salaries or to get us to write our emails? And in fact, you'll see brands at the moment which purport to be able to automatically produce high quality content marketing, to be able to automate all of your email comments. These are things that exist now. Even things like price. I can't remember where I stole this screenshot from, but essentially that's an example that right now brands like Amazon and Sears and Best Buy are actively, automatically through machine learning, adjusting their pricing, not just to be the cheapest, but to find the best intersect of price versus expected units sold against their competitors, and constantly reacting to each other and reacting to other factors like what time of day is it, what's the season of the moon, how hot is it, how cold is it, how many days until the election, myriads of data sets that start to connect and build up patterns that we wouldn't even be able to understand. In fact, on that, there's a company in China at the moment who have an AI machine learning system on a board of directors which has voting rights, because it sees patterns in data and world markets and trading and currencies that they don't see, because it's looking at data in an entirely different way and connecting up data sets we usually wouldn't. Phenomenal, because the implications of that mean that it's not just call centers, for example, which are becoming training sets. It's all of us in our ivory towers of digital marketing. The work we do is essentially just pattern matching. We're looking at brands and consumers and marketplaces and trying to find cut through to build propositions and generate campaign ideas. These are just patterns, and computers can do this much better than us. The implications of that are then large-scale unemployment, initially in the developing markets, but very, very quickly into our worlds and the service industries in particular, which means we need to think about our skills. Now, I think there's a new world where we reevaluate what we mean by marketing and advertising and branding, which I'll go over very, very quickly. Google have already spotted this. It's no coincidence that their education course, as crap as Squared is called Join the Revolution, or it's titled Join the Revolution. They understand that it's not about learning new skills, but new combinations. And the real winners and the people who will be successful in the future will be the people who have different conjoining skills. So, for example, PR people who understand creative, or ECRM people who also understand technical, the people who join skills in different areas in the way that machines will struggle to. For marketing people, and especially SEO and above the line, we need to stop trying to sell things. Now, that's hugely contentious, but when you think it through, it's quite interesting. The idea that if I am SEO for Domino's Pizza or Just Eat, my objective isn't to sell pizzas. My objective is to build a positive relationship so that the point at which somebody wants a pizza, I am the brand that's in mind. My objective is to get app installs, to get usage, to have conversations, to build a positive association. It's a huge shift in thinking. PPC advertising all becomes about lead generation, fulfillment, multi-touch attribution, etc. I won't go into in much depth. And brand then becomes all about how do you support, surprise, segment, and understand your audience. So wrapping up, there's a problem with this vision, which is that the brands who could mobilize to take advantage of it and change the world and do some really awesome stuff haven't, because they are too slow, because senior business leaders are slow to embrace change, which you saw earlier. And the people who we perhaps don't necessarily want to win this space because they're a little bit scary and a little bit out of control are already winning and have already got a competitive gap. So for us, essentially, we end up living in a world run by super organizations, the Googles, the Amazons, and particularly the people who own the hubs, the Google Homes, the Amazon Echoes, and who fulfill for those needs. And when you look at the behaviors of these brands and how they are actively fragmenting, so they move from Google into Alphabet, various different parts of Amazon coming apart, it's very hard to legislate against monopolies, against unfair competition when you're talking about lots of disparate brands. So these brands move very, very quickly to subjugate, to consume, and to own other parts of the ecosystem. So for us then, essentially, you need to pick one of these brands, because in this world, these are the only ones which will matter. They're the only ones who are significant and the only ones who are going to impact change. And again, going back to the beginning, this doesn't feel like a utopia. This feels like a bit of a mess that will make as a result of our decision making. So us as individuals, what do? We need to be the best we possibly can, not only technically, not only strategically, but also morally and intellectually, and to think this world doesn't happen by accident, a world dominated by these superpowers who really aren't in it for us, but are in it to convince us that we need 1 hour shipping. We need to think that world, we arrive there through the little decisions that we make today, one at a time, the campaigns we launch, the decisions we make, the bids we launch, all of those decisions one at a time create that. What we do need to do desperately is learn all of the tech, understand this world that we're moving into and the possibilities and the implications, and to pick sides. You know what? You might be absolutely fine with a world dominated by Uber and Apple, and I'll admit that it sounds quite interesting, but let's not get there accidentally. Let's collectively and individually decide the world we want to create and make sure that we understand what we're doing. I think that's it for me. I think we'll probably, how are we for time? Have we got time for a couple of questions?
We're struggling for time, but I think that was a 2-hour presentation in about 40 minutes. So that's very impressive. So obviously it's not just about the technology, it's about the intelligent, appropriate use of the technology for your industry.
Yes.
Nice tweets. Tom Armentant, really enjoying the great content coming from Digital Olympus. Great to have you on here, Tom. So we've got, just to summarize, a couple of points. Companies like Facebook competing to own our behavior. We've got Amazon storing books based upon rating. So how might that impact you as an e-commerce business as well? We've got the next generation Bitcoin coming along. That might impact international payments, international trade there as well. So much to talk about. Let's pick one question here, and that is, you've been talking a lot about the revolution of the product marketplace, John. What are your thoughts on how this revolution might impact people offering something like a marketing service?
Oh, that's interesting. So this is one of the challenges is originally marketing and agency was all about consultation. It was how you need to bring in somebody who understands how consumers think and behave to support your business, to let you know the right ideas, to connect you to the consumer, to add intelligence. And then as digital marketing evolved and became technical, we diminished a bit, I think. We became commodity providers, we became the people who run the adverts. And actually what we need to see is a bit of a move back to that. And that in a world of all these different technologies and all these different options and implications, brands will need smart people who can point them in the right direction, because you can't do all of this. You're going to have to pick your fights and decide where you invest. And there's a lot of risk with getting that wrong. So marketing agencies, marketing consultancies and services, those kinds of people will need to understand all of the implications of all of this and then point brands in the right direction, I think.
Superb stuff, superb answer and great presentation. So thanks so much for coming on, Jono.